Before we dive into the news, I just wanted to wish everybody who celebrates it a happy Holy Week. I hope it's spiritual and enlightening to those of you who follow the traditions. Alrighty, so reading through the news, a couple of things have caught my attention today. Obviously, how could you not pay attention to Parkinson's is a man-made disease? The article deals with what this researcher thinks that pesticides are causing Parkinson's. I mean, yeah, chemicals have all kinds of unintended consequences. I wouldn't put it past the possibility, but it requires more attention. And right now, I kind of wanted to focus on the economic and political stuff before we dive into that, because some things really did catch my attention that I think require more immediate attention, and you'll see why, right? Of course, Parkinson's is important. But shootings, debt, and political paralysis shows Brussels is falling apart, and we'll talk about that more in a little bit. Europe's NGOs fear Trump-style funding cuts are coming. This one's a tricky one because a lot of NGOs are doing good things and a lot of other NGOs are doing not so good things and just serve as obstacles to, different policies that would otherwise help most of us. So it's a mixed bag. I really don't want to say anything. I think you'd have to kind of figure this out on a case-by-case basis. Trump says pharma tariffs will entice back drug production. According to this article, it says they won't. So of course, this is political.eu, so it's the European version of Politico. A lot of the exports from the European Union into the US are pharmaceuticals. So take this with a grain of salt, right? Meaning, of course, there's going to be a bias. The EU will use Trump tariff freeze to push new fossil fuel deal. So apparently the EU is going to buy more liquefied natural gas, which makes you wonder, well, where's all this green stuff? Where's the green agenda, right? But yeah, it is what it is. And then the German coalition deals back EU's 90% target with caveats. They promise again and re-promise that there's going to be reductions in carbon emissions, but that there never is, and carbon emissions are going up, as we all know. So, let's just dive into this one, because this one really caught my attention. So, for those of you that don't know, Brussels is where most of the European Union's institutions are, or at least a lot of them, right? And apparently, this was truly interesting. So there's shootings in that city. There are so many shootings in that city related to drugs that in the first month and a half of this year alone, so 2025, in the first 40 days, there was 11 shootings. That sounds like a Latin American country, to be quite honest. And that's really remarkable. And what is causing this problem? Obviously, drug trade. But the fact that it's going unabated is because there's no government in that city, which is interesting. So normally, from on the other side of the Atlantic, where I'm originally from, people say, well, look at these European countries. Some of them don't even have governments and everything is working just fine. No, it's not, clearly. And it's becoming increasingly more complicated to be able to deal with this. So apparently, not only is there a problem in the sense that there's no governance whatsoever, there's a debt problem as well. So if there is no government that's taking the reins of what's going on in the city, they're not going to be able to deal with the deficit in their budget, which is apparently 4 million euros a day. The capital already has a debt of 14 billion euros, and that's not considering the 1.6 billion that they're going to probably acquire this year. So, for those that don't know, Brussels is there's at least three different, I don't know how to even categorize it. 3 different regions for sure, but within each region they have their own language and their own way of, not their own way, but they've got their own governance arrangements. Let's put it that way. So there's the French-speaking Wallonia, and then there's the Dutch-speaking Flanders in the north, and there's obviously, like I said, 3 regions. I guess there's one that's a little bit more mixed between the two. And they're finding it very difficult to form governments. And to the point that, it's become more or less a French versus Dutch. And that's resulting in a stalemate. And I want to find it here very quickly. But One of the politicians that was interviewed for this article, and I will leave the link below as always for this stuff, notes that it's very immature, which was interesting to me to see that, because imagine that this is just Belgium, right, within the same country. Now imagine all of the European Union, right? Even as the Trump administration's tariffs threaten the entire European Union, it seems like they're not able to get their act together in the most basic of things, which is just governing a city. So the article talks about how they might fuse the entire police system in Belgium, which apparently there's about 6 agencies there. I think that's what I read in the article. And yeah, it's just like to give you guys an example of what I'm talking about, it says it's just political posturing that's just blocking Brussels. You're my friend, you're not. I want to work with you, but not with you. It's immature. And yeah, that's one of the recurrent themes of why I started the Atelier. We can't keep doing this, right? This is not helpful. This is not going to solve problems long term, and the problems are mounting, right? So I thought that was interesting, and be sure to check out the article and let me know what you think. Now, as for political in the US, 2 things caught my attention here, right? You can read all the headlines and all what's going on. But this one, which we're going to talk about a little bit more in depth in a second, but how bad is California's housing crisis? A first in the nation bill would let students live in cars. Man, that is depressing, but we'll talk about it in a second. The other one that really caught my attention was this. We are flying blind. RFK Jr.'s cuts halt data collection on abortion, cancer, HIV, and more. It's a basic tenet of, if one of the most basic things we've learned in the last, 200 years, basically since Florence Nightingale. For those that don't know, she's the mother of modern nursing, right? And she was, if not the first, one of the first people to put statistics into her craft, right? Which was in that moment nursing in the Crimean War, for those that don't know. Anyway, ever since then, we've kind of realized that you cannot manage what you can't measure, right? So if you're not taking any data, then how on God's green earth are you going to know if you're moving in the right direction, trying to combat some pretty bad stuff here, which is, cancer, HIV, what's going on with abortion and all that. Oh, and before I forget, one last news article here caught my attention too, and we'll talk about that as well. Trump may be triggering the fastest nuclear weapons race since the Cold War, and we'll talk about that. But before that, I just did want to mention this, which is like staggering. I don't understand how it's possible that in the richest, most powerful, most advanced country on the planet, students, which will then go into the labor force and take the reins and inherit the institutions on which this country operates, have to live in their cars because they can't afford a place to live as a student, right? And the Democrats have a supermajority in the state legislature. It mentions that in this article. And their solution to this problem, a jarring remedy of last resort for California's college students, is navigating the student housing crisis. Let them sleep in their cars. That's the solution. Of course, this is not a permanent solution. This is just something immediately, the Band-Aid, so that they can go into the legislature, I'm hoping, and then restructure this and try to give a permanent solution to what's going on. Will they be able to achieve it? How long that's going to take? How much is it going to cost? Yeah, who knows, right? But it is disappointing to say the least. So interestingly, one community college says, which has about 40,000 students, doesn't have offer student housing. But in 2021, they let 70 students, and they found out that 70 students were sleeping in their cars. So they quickly got to work to give a safe parking pilot program. What surprised me was that this pilot program cost $200,000 per year to run the program. And what that entails is like giving security, I guess, in the parking lot, just to make sure that things operate well, offering showers, restrooms, and free internet service or Wi-Fi, right? So why are things so expensive in the US? I don't understand. Why would it cost $200,000 a year? But, I obviously, before just, defacing the program or just criticizing it blindly, I'm guessing that they have to pay for personnel, hours, making sure that the place is appropriate and offering internet service and the showers. I guess that's what costs $200,000 a year. Yeah, and just this is just it's remarkable. It really is remarkable, and I don't know what to say really. It's just California being, I think, the richest state in the United States. And if it was an economy unto itself, I think it would be like the eighth biggest economy on the planet. And yet they can't offer their students housing, affordable housing. It's remarkable, right? And the one that I think article really is relevant to everybody on the planet is the fact that given what's going on in the world and the realignment of alliances, some alliances are being questioned. And basically, countries that can are now talking about nuclear weapons, right? Seriously, and this is not a good thing. So President Trump, whatever you may think of him, has come out to speak out against World War III. He's talking about reducing nuclear arsenals. At least he's talking about it, right? But that ironically is having the opposite effect for the rest of the planet. So countries that depended on the American commitment to their defense are now questioning the fact that, well, if the US walks away from its self-acquired, self-imposed commitments to Ukraine, to Taiwan, then will have to reconsider their own defense. Ironically, the article kind of hints at that, well, if the new administration in the United States is telling their European allies that they need to defend themselves and spend more on their defense, well, then what is the only way that you can really defend yourself nowadays, right? And it turns out that it's nuclear weapons. And interestingly, one official here, Elbridge Colby, who was interviewed by South Korean news, said that South Korea will have to have primary, essentially overwhelming responsibility for its own defense. So the U.S. should not sanction Seoul if it decides to go nuclear. And of course, North Korea has nuclear weapons. So then South Korea is trying to catch up or have a deterrent against the North. So it introduces more players into the global stage with nuclear capabilities, and that makes the world a lot more, in my opinion, dangerous. I don't think nuclear weapons should spread. It's just my personal belief. I think that they offer the possibility to truly end life on the planet, because once that kicks off, we have never seen it. We don't know where it ends. And if enough nuclear weapons go off, and this is actually something Michio Kaku said many years ago, enough nuclear weapons can go off and they can evaporate the atmosphere. And people don't realize that we really live on a thin layer on top of the planet. It's not like we live inside 6,000 kilometers all the way to the core. We live very much on the surface of the planet. Enough nuclear weapons go off, you alter the chemical composition of the atmosphere, and it's pretty much lights out for us, right? So, with that cheerful note, the article goes on to explain that who's actually thinking about it, who had a program up until more or less the 80s. And the countries that ultimately gave up their nuclear weapons were Argentina, Australia, Brazil, Italy, South Africa, South Korea, Sweden, Switzerland, Taiwan, and Yugoslavia. This country does no longer exist. So if it had nuclear weapons at the time it broke apart into many countries, Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Kosovo, and Serbia, those countries are still in conflict today, right? So how would have that turned out? Who knows? Can you imagine these countries, the political stability and economic stability, what would be going on? It's unfortunate, but it's a reality. There's corruption in some of these countries. I'm not trying to single any one country out, but would they sell it to bad actors out there? The nuclear capabilities, I mean. So it's not good for nuclear technology to spread by any means whatsoever. So at the time of this recording, there's only, well, we think that there's only 9 countries that have nuclear weapons, right? So it's the United States, of course, Britain, China, France, India, Israel, Pakistan, Russia, and of course North Korea. Like it or not, now they have the weapons, right? The article goes on to talk about how there's flashpoints and how different regions are considering this. So in Europe, Germany is now discussing the possibility of having their own nuclear weapons. Now, remember, the way that policy forms is that a politician will say something, or a group, a think tank will say something, then it goes on into the public arena, people start talking about it. Eventually, it's like a self-reinforcing mechanism where this just talking about something starts to build pressure, and politicians pick up on that because they're politicians, right? And then they start trying to form policy and move it through legislature to kind of change either constitutions, laws, what have you. And so this is how it begins. And then if you're following what's going on in Germany, recently they changed their constitution to be able to spend more on defense, right? And, fearing the retreat of the US from the continent. Another European country that's very worried about what's going on in the world is obviously Poland, and they're also talking about having nuclear weapons. As for Ukraine, which of course is in the state of war right now, they feel threatened by the abandonment of Washington. And so President Zelensky has openly said that either Ukraine will have nuclear weapons and then it will be a defense for us, or Ukraine will be in NATO. Now, if you followed what happened recently, President Trump has said that Ukraine will not be in NATO, and this has been repeated by Mark Rutte, who is the Secretary General of NATO, right? So God knows what's going to happen here. France has talked about extending its nuclear umbrella to all of Europe now, but the article goes on to say that Germany and Poland do not trust this commitment, right? So who knows, historical grievances between these countries, that they don't fully trust each other, which is interesting given that they're on the European continent and so much history has been between all of these countries. You would think that they buried the hatchet and moved on and historically shifted their focus into unity, but that doesn't seem to be fully the case, right? At least not yet. Now, where I think there's more flashpoints and more immediate threats, in my opinion, are in the Middle East, where experts believe that Iran has been backed into a strategic corner because Israel has decimated its proxy armies. We're talking about, you know which ones we're talking about here. And the Trump administration in its first term withdrew from the Obama era negotiated agreements. So if Iran were to acquire a nuclear weapon, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman have indicated that they would have to duplicate Iranian nuclear capabilities if Tehran ever got the bomb, which would add more players with potentially nuclear weapons. So as the U.S. is trying to at least say that they are trying to reduce the number of proliferation, or at least eliminate it fully, the world seems to be going in the opposite direction, precisely because the U.S. is retreating from the world in East Asia. So the Trump administration's nuclear policy is less clear, and we should also note that just because right now the Trump administration is saying one thing doesn't mean that countries are going to reconsider their position once the Trump administration ends at some point in the next 4 years, because, well, now the precedent is set and you can no longer depend on the U.S. to come to your aid, right? So you have to fend for yourself, and that means building up a nuclear program, which is not just pressing a few buttons, right? You have to acquire the material, you have to build the expertise, you have to build the processing plants and all the stuff, the logistics that goes into that. So once you set that in motion, it's not like, well, the US says something else and that's it. That's the end of it, right? That's not how this works. And in these countries, Japan, obviously, it's a taboo. Japan is talking about having its own nuclear weapons. South Korea, as we talked about, Taiwan. And interestingly, so they're trying to, the Trump administration trying to control this stuff, but again, it's not clear that what their focus is, because apparently the article goes on to talk about the fact that there's not a whole lot of people are getting fired from the government, if you've noticed, and those that are still there, the expertise to be able to have these negotiations and pay attention to what other countries are doing are spread thin to the point of paralysis. You will read that in the article. And so it's just not clear what we're going to do here, what's going to happen, and how countries are going to react, right? It's very unclear. Um, yeah, so I just wanted to share that with all of you. I'd love to get your thoughts, both what's going on in California and Brussels. I think those are more manageable because those are localized and it just requires government action. That it's going to be solved overnight, of course not, but I think it's a lot easier to deal with than nuclear proliferation around the planet, right? And of course, I would love to hear your thoughts about what's going on and what do you guys think about the spread of nuclear weapons around the world?